The Mafia boss found her drowning. When he pulled her up, she whispered a name that made him freeze. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The night was unusually quiet in the heart of the city. The usual sounds of traffic and chatter were replaced with the eerie stillness that seemed to settle over the street like a heavy blanket. From a distance, the faint glow of streetlights illuminated the cobblestone road that led to the canal. It was late, and the only movement came from the gentle ripples of water that reflected the dim light. As he walked along the path, the Mafia boss, a man known for his cold, calculating nature, couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was about to happen. His footsteps echoed in the silence, a reminder of the heavy responsibility he carried as one of the most feared men in the city. He had learned to trust his instincts, and tonight, they were telling him that danger was near. As he reached the edge of the canal, he froze. The faint sound of a struggle reached his ears. Someone was in the water. Without thinking, he rushed toward the noise. The sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. A young woman, drenched and struggling to stay above the water, was desperately trying to keep herself afloat. Her movements were frantic, and her face, pale and terrified, made it clear that she was losing the fight. Without hesitation, the Mafia boss dove into the water. The cold shock of the canal hit him, but he pushed through, grabbing her with a strength born of desperation. He hauled her up, gasping for breath as they reached the edge. With all his might, he pulled her to safety. The woman collapsed onto the cold ground, coughing and shivering. Her body was weak, and her clothes clung to her, soaked through. She was barely conscious, and the Mafia boss could feel her heart racing against her chest. He kneeled beside her, checking for signs of life. His heart pounded as he worked to revive her, his hands shaking from the intensity of the moment. Slowly, she opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but when she saw him, her expression changed. She whispered a name, barely audible through her trembling lips. Victor. The Mafia boss froze. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He had heard that name before, many years ago. Victor was the one man he had always feared, the one enemy he could never defeat. And now, this girl, the one he had just saved, had spoken his name. What did it mean? Why had she said it? Was she connected to Victor in some way? His mind raced with questions, but before he could ask, she passed out once more. The Mafia boss sat there in stunned silence, the name echoing in his mind. There was something far more dangerous at play here than he had realized. His life, and the fragile balance of power he had built, was about to change forever. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive back into the story. The woman, still unconscious, lay sprawled out in front of him, her chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. The Mafia boss could barely think straight. His hands were shaking slightly, his mind racing to make sense of everything. The name she had whispered, Victor, was one that haunted him. It wasn't just any name. It was the name of his greatest enemy, the man who had nearly destroyed everything he had worked so hard to build. But why would this woman, this stranger, say that name? And what did it mean for him? He looked down at her, his face hardening with determination. He had to get answers. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard, not now. His life, his empire, was built on control, and control was something he could never lose. Not to some random girl, and certainly not because of a name he thought was long buried. The woman's face was pale, her hair soaked and tangled, clinging to her skin like wet rope. He bent down and checked her pulse again, feeling the faint beat under his fingers. She was alive, but barely. He had to get her to safety. With one swift motion, he scooped her up, holding her firmly in his arms as he made his way back to his car. The cold night air bit at his skin, but the urgency of the situation kept him focused. As he reached his car, He opened the back door and carefully placed her inside. The drive to his private estate felt like it took forever. His thoughts were racing. Could this be a setup? A trap? Was Victor behind this? His mind flashed back to their last encounter. It had been brutal. Victor had nearly destroyed everything. The men, the money, the power. He had disappeared after that, leaving behind a trail of blood and wreckage. No one had seen or heard from him since. And yet, here was this woman, mentioning his name, dragging him back into a past he had fought so hard to bury. When they finally arrived at the estate, the Mafia boss didn't waste any time. He carried the woman into his mansion, his security team rushing to open the door for him. "Get the doctor," he barked at one of his men as he passed by. The last thing he needed was another complication. The doctor arrived within minutes, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. He immediately went to work, checking her vitals, assessing her condition. "She's in bad shape," the doctor muttered, his voice low. "She's been in the water for a while. It's a miracle she didn't drown." The Mafia boss nodded, not saying a word. He didn't care about the details of her injuries right now. He had bigger questions to answer. The doctor gave him a brief look, then continued to work. The Mafia boss paced back and forth, his mind still reeling. Who was this woman? What did she know about Victor? And why had she been in the water? Was she trying to escape from someone? Or was she just another pawn in a game he wasn't even aware of? He stopped pacing and turned to his men. "Get everything you can on her," he ordered. "Find out who she is, who she's connected to. And don't let anyone know she's here." "Not yet." The men nodded and left the room. The Mafia boss stood by the door, his eyes never leaving the woman. He had a feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. The answers he was looking for were out there, but they weren't going to come easy. And if Victor was involved in any way, the danger was much closer than he realized. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a faint groan. He looked back to see the woman stirring, her eyes fluttering open. She was awake, but disoriented. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, he thought he saw recognition in her eyes. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and controlled. She didn't respond at first, just looked at him with a confused expression. Then, as if struggling to remember something important, she whispered again, "Victor, he's coming." The words sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just some coincidence. It never was. The past was coming for him, and it was bringing all its secrets with it. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive back into the story. The Mafia boss stared at the woman, his mind spinning. Her words echoed in his head. "Victor, he's coming." He couldn't shake the thought. Victor, the name that had haunted him for years, had somehow crept back into his life. But why? What did this woman know that he didn't? And more importantly, why had she been left to drown? As the woman lay there, her breathing shallow, the Mafia boss's thoughts ran wild. His world had always been one of power, control, and fear. But this was something else entirely. He had fought for everything he had, clawed his way to the top of a ruthless underworld. And yet, now, it seemed like his enemies were closing in, one by one. Victor was the name of his greatest rival, a man who had once been a shadow in the Mafia world. No one knew much about him, except that he was dangerous, calculating, and elusive. Victor had vanished years ago after a failed attempt to take over the Mafia boss's empire. It had been a bloody battle, one that had left countless bodies in its wake. The boss had thought he had won. But now, hearing that name from the lips of this mysterious woman, he felt the cold grip of fear begin to tighten around his chest. She had to know something. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He looked down at her, watching her closely as she shifted slightly in the bed, still delirious from her near drowning. She was awake now, her eyes barely open, but there was a hint of recognition in her gaze. She could sense the tension in the room, the unspoken questions that hung heavy in the air. "What do you know about Victor?" the Mafia boss asked, his voice low but firm. She blinked slowly, her lips parting as though she were about to speak. But instead, she just looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. It was as if she was battling with herself, trying to find the words to explain something that was too dangerous to say aloud. The Mafia boss's patience was wearing thin. He needed to know what this woman was hiding. "Tell me everything," he urged, his tone becoming more forceful. Slowly, she gathered the strength to sit up. Her movements were slow and shaky, but she managed to hold herself upright. "Victor," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not just an enemy. He's part of a much larger plan. A plan that involves you and me." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. A larger plan? He had no idea what she was talking about. "What do you mean?" he demanded, leaning in closer. She winced at his sudden movement, but she didn't back down. "Victor's been watching you," she said, her voice steady despite the pain she was clearly in. "He's been planning for this moment for years. He knew you would rise to power, and he's been waiting for the right time to strike." The Mafia boss's mind raced. This was more than just a rivalry. It was a game of strategy, a game of patience, and Victor had been playing it better than anyone had ever realized. But why had this woman been dragged into it? Was she just a pawn in Victor's game, or was there something more to her story? As if reading his thoughts, the woman spoke again. "I'm not just some pawn," she said, her eyes flashing with a sudden intensity. "I've been part of his plan from the beginning. I'm the key." The Mafia boss leaned back, his mind reeling. She was the key? To what? To Victor's plan? To his downfall? He had no idea, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. Victor's shadow was longer than he had ever imagined, and now it was moving closer. "Why did you try to escape?" he asked, his voice colder now, as he watched her carefully. "Was it Victor's doing?" The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking to the door as though she was searching for an escape. "I was trying to get away," she confessed, "but it's not that simple. Victor's men are everywhere. He has eyes everywhere. You can't hide from him. Not now." The words sunk in like a cold blade. The Mafia boss had always been the one with the power, the one who controlled everything. But now, for the first time in years, he felt completely out of control. Victor wasn't just a threat. He was a ghost, a force that could move in and out of the shadows without anyone noticing. And this woman, she had been caught in the middle of it all. He stared at her, his thoughts racing. If Victor was really coming, if this woman was right, then things were about to get far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. His empire, the one he had fought so hard to build, was at risk, and with it, his very life. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue the story. The woman's confession was like a dagger to the heart. The Mafia boss felt his world begin to shift, the ground beneath him crumbling as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Victor was coming. The very words she had whispered haunted him. This was no longer a simple case of a long-forgotten rival resurfacing. There was something bigger at play, something that had been planned for years, and now, he was at the center of it all. As the Mafia boss stared at her, his mind churned. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken words. This woman, this stranger, had been caught in a deadly game. She had said she was the key to Victor's plan, but what did that mean? What exactly was Victor trying to accomplish? He had no answers yet, but one thing was clear. Victor had played a much deeper game than he had ever realized. The Mafia boss stood and paced across the room, his hands running through his hair in frustration. His life, his empire, had always been about control, about knowing every move before it happened. But now, he was playing a game he didn't understand, and that scared him more than anything. He turned back to the woman, who was now sitting up, her face pale but determined. "You said you were the key," he said, his voice low. "What does that mean?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. "Victor has been planning this for years," she said, her voice steady despite the pain she was clearly in. "He knew you would become the man you are. He's been watching you, learning everything about you. And now, he wants to destroy everything you've built." The Mafia boss narrowed his eyes, his fists clenching. He had always known that power came with enemies, but this was something he had never imagined. Victor wasn't just trying to take over his empire. He was trying to break him, to shatter the very foundation of his life. "Why didn't you warn me earlier?" he demanded. The woman flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I couldn't," she whispered. "Victor's men have been watching me. I couldn't risk it. But now it's too late." The Mafia boss felt a surge of anger, but he pushed it down. He needed answers, not more questions. He leaned in closer, his voice hard. "What do you know about his plan? Tell me everything." The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room as though she were searching for a way out. But there was no escape. She had already told him too much. "Victor's plan involves you," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "He's been waiting for the right moment, and now that he knows you're vulnerable, he's going to strike. You've been targeted, Mafia boss. You and everything you've worked for." The Mafia boss's mind raced. He had always been careful, always one step ahead of his enemies. But this was different. Victor had been playing a long game, and now the clock was ticking. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "How do I stop him?" he asked, his voice colder than ever. The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and regret. "You can't stop him," she said softly. "Not unless you find out who's really behind him. Victor's just the pawn in a much larger game. If you want to survive, you have to go after the people pulling his strings." The Mafia boss felt a chill run down his spine. If Victor was just a pawn, then who was the king in this game? Who was really behind the scenes, orchestrating this entire plot? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing. Victor was just the beginning. There were more enemies, more forces at play than he had ever imagined. And they were closing in fast. He turned to leave the room, his mind already racing with plans. "Get her out of here," he ordered his men. "Make sure she's safe." But as he reached the door, the woman called out to him. "You can't trust anyone," she said, her voice shaking. "Not even your own men. Victor's reach is longer than you think." The Mafia boss froze. Not even his own men. That was the last thing he wanted to hear. He had built his empire on loyalty, on the idea that no one could betray him. But now, with every word this woman spoke, that foundation seemed to crumble a little more. He looked back at her one last time. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "No one can take me down." But as he walked out the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might be wrong. For the first time in his life, he wasn't so sure. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue the story. The Mafia boss walked down the long, dimly lit hallway of his mansion, his mind still tangled with the events of the past few hours. His thoughts kept returning to the woman, the mysterious woman who had resurfaced from the depths of the canal with Victor's name on her lips. She had said he's coming. But who exactly was coming? The name Victor had once been synonymous with his greatest enemy. But now, the more he thought about it, the more it became clear. Victor was just one part of something much bigger, a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. The Mafia boss had spent years building his empire, a kingdom built on power, wealth, and fear. He had crushed rivals without hesitation, but this felt different. The threat had taken a more subtle form, a game of shadows where the rules were not clear, and his every move was being watched. As he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped in front of the door to his private study. The room was his sanctuary, a place where he could think, plan, and control everything that happened in his world. He opened the door and stepped inside, the cool air inside providing a brief relief from the tension outside. The Mafia boss walked over to his desk, his gaze falling on the array of documents and reports scattered across it. None of them mattered anymore. None of them held the answers he needed. He stared at the dark wood of his desk, his hands resting on the edge. "Victor's coming," the woman had said. But why now? Why after all these years? He had thought the past was behind him. He had thought Victor was gone for good. But now, here he was, standing at the edge of a storm that he had not seen coming. He needed answers. He needed to know what was happening. He needed to understand how deep this went. The door creaked open, and one of his most trusted men, Luca, stepped inside. Luca was tall, with a broad build and a calm demeanor. He had been with the Mafia boss for years, ever since the early days when they had built the empire from nothing. "Boss," Lucas said, his voice low. We've got a problem. The Mafia boss looked up, his mind snapping back to the present. What is it? The girl, Lucas said, glancing over his shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was listening. She's gone. The Mafia boss's blood ran cold. Gone, he repeated. What do you mean gone? She was being guarded. Luca continued, his voice tight with concern. But someone got to her. We don't know how, but she's disappeared. The Mafia boss stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a sharp sound. Find her, he said, his voice cold and hard. I want every man we have out there searching for her. She knows something, and I need to find out what it is. Luca nodded and turned to leave, but the Mafia boss stopped him. And make sure no one knows about this. I don't want anyone to know she's missing. If Victor's behind this, we need to keep things quiet. Understand? Luca hesitated for a moment before nodding again. Understood, boss. As Luca exited the room, the Mafia boss's thoughts continued to race. If Victor was involved, this wasn't just about a woman. It was about a game that had been played long before he even knew the rules. He sat back down in his chair, his mind going over everything again. The woman had said she was the key. The key to what? Was she meant to unlock something? Or was she just a distraction? Was Victor using her to manipulate him? It didn't make sense. But then again, nothing about this situation made sense. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, scattered in front of him, but the picture they formed was still unclear. He needed more information, but what if the information was already out there, hidden in plain sight? What if he had overlooked something crucial? The Mafia boss stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate that stretched out beneath him. He had everything, a fortune, power, influence, but in that moment, it all felt meaningless. The storm was closing in, and he could feel the weight of the danger bearing down on him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about staying one step ahead, about outsmarting an enemy who was always in the shadows. He had never felt more vulnerable. And the more he thought about the woman, the more he realized that he had underestimated her. She wasn't just a pawn. She was someone who had been caught in the crossfire of a game that was bigger than both of them. If he was going to survive, he had to find her. And more importantly, he had to understand what Victor was really after. His empire, everything he had fought for, was at risk. The stakes had never been higher. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue with today's story. The Mafia boss paced the length of his study, the shadows in the corners of the room reflecting the dark thoughts in his mind. He had given the order to find the woman, but deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. His empire was vast, but even with all the men and resources at his disposal, this situation felt like he was fighting in the dark. The woman, she had been the key, the only one who had seemed to know what was truly happening. She had spoken of a larger plan, one that involved Victor and, by extension, him. Victor is coming. Those words repeated in his mind, almost like a chant. What was Victor really after? The Mafia boss had always been in control, always one step ahead of his enemies. But now, it felt as if the game was rigged. He stopped in front of his desk and sat down. The documents that had once held the keys to his power now seemed meaningless. He had spent years building his empire, defeating rivals, eliminating threats. But now, with Victor's shadow looming over him, he wasn't sure who he was fighting anymore. Was it just Victor, or was there something larger at play? He stared at the glass of whiskey on his desk, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't feel like drinking. He needed answers. The woman had told him to look beyond Victor, to see who was truly pulling the strings. But how? Who could be behind all this? The Mafia boss's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing on the desk. He picked it up quickly, his instincts on high alert. It was Luca. Boss. Luca's voice crackled through the phone. We've found something. The Mafia boss sat up straight. What is it? We've tracked down one of the men who was watching the woman. He's dead. The words hung in the air, a heavy silence settling between them. Dead. The Mafia boss repeated. How? He was found in a warehouse, shot in the head. No witnesses, no sign of struggle. It looks clean. The The Mafia boss's mind began to race. Who would have wanted to silence someone so quickly? And why? Where is the body? He asked, his voice sharp. It's being held at a location outside the city. I'll have a team bring it to you. Do it. And make sure no one knows about this. Not a word to anyone outside this room. The Mafia boss ordered. He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. This wasn't just about the woman anymore. Someone was trying to cover their tracks, to erase any trace of the events that had transpired. Whoever had silenced the man at the warehouse wasn't just after the woman. They were after him. The Mafia boss rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. His mind flashed back to the last time he had been caught in such a web. It had been years ago, before he had built the empire that now stretched across the city. Back then, he had been young, eager, and naive. But now, with his empire and his reputation on the line, he couldn't afford to be reckless. The phone buzzed again, and the Mafia boss picked it up without hesitation. It was Luca again. Boss, you're going to want to see this, Luca said. The Mafia boss stood up, his mind already anticipating what was coming next. What is it? We found a video, Luca replied. It's footage of the woman before she was brought to you. She was being followed by a group of men, Victor's men. The Mafia boss's heart skipped a beat. He knew Victor had been a shadow, but this was something else entirely. Where did you find this footage? We traced it back to one of Victor's safe houses. It's a secure location, but we managed to get in. The Mafia boss's mind raced. He had to see the video. He needed to understand what Victor was planning, how deep this went. Bring it to my office. Now. When Luca arrived with the video footage, the Mafia boss wasted no time. He sat down at his desk, his fingers tapping impatiently as the screen came to life. The footage showed the woman, her face tired and bruised, walking down a dark alleyway. Behind her, a group of men shadowed her, their faces obscured by the shadows. But the woman, she seemed to know they were there. She was leading them somewhere. The Mafia boss watched closely, his eyes narrowing. The video cut to another angle, showing the woman entering a building. It was a rundown structure, a place that looked abandoned. The men followed her inside. The footage ended there. The Mafia boss leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on the screen. So, the woman had been running from something, or someone. She hadn't just ended up in the canal by accident. She had been led there. And now, the man behind it all was closing in. He couldn't allow this to continue. Victor's game was getting too dangerous. And the Mafia boss knew he had to act, before it was too late. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive back into today's story. The Mafia boss stared at the screen, replaying the video in his mind. The footage was more than just an eye-opener. It was a confirmation. The woman, bruised and clearly on the run, wasn't just a random victim caught in the crossfire. She had been actively trying to escape something far bigger than herself. That realization hit the Mafia boss like a hammer to the chest. Victor wasn't just targeting him. He had been targeting this woman all along. She wasn't just collateral damage. She was a key player in whatever game Victor had been orchestrating from the shadows. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in on him as his mind worked furiously. If she had been running from Victor's men all this time, and if they were the ones who had set the trap to drown her, then this wasn't just about power. It was personal. For the first time in years, the Mafia boss felt the edges of his carefully controlled empire beginning to crack. His men had always been loyal, his enemies predictable. But now, he was facing a foe who was far more elusive, someone who understood how to stay hidden in plain sight. He had no idea who was working for Victor, who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. All he had was the woman, and she was more valuable now than ever. He needed her alive. He needed to find her before Victor's men did. As he paced across the room, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was Luca. Boss, we've got a lead on her whereabouts. The Mafia boss froze, his heart skipping a beat. Where? He asked, his voice tight. We've tracked her to an old warehouse on the edge of town. It's isolated. No one around. We think she might be hiding there. Get a team ready, the Mafia boss ordered, moving quickly to his desk. I'm going with you. He hung up before Luca could respond. There was no time to waste. He couldn't afford to wait for his men to handle this. Not now. Not when every second counted. He grabbed his coat, checked his sidearm, and made his way to the garage. The engine roared to life as he sped through the streets, the city. Lights flashing past him. His mind was racing as fast as the car. Every decision he had made up until now had been based on a false assumption. He thought he was the one in control. He thought he had outplayed Victor at every turn. But now, it was clear that the real game was just beginning. He had underestimated Victor's reach, and now, he was paying the price. The drive to the warehouse seemed to take forever. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt. The Mafia boss wasn't just racing to find the woman. He was racing against time. He had no idea what kind of trap Victor had set, but he couldn't afford to walk into it unprepared. When he finally arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The warehouse stood alone in the dark, surrounded by nothing but empty lots and overgrown weeds. He parked the car and stepped out, motioning for his men to stay back. He needed to do this on his own. He moved toward the entrance, his hand on his gun, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Everything seemed normal, too normal. He pushed open the door slowly, the creaking sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air smelled of rust and dust. Boxes and crates were stacked high, some open, some sealed tight. There was no sign of anyone, no sign of the woman. He moved cautiously, each step measured, his senses heightened. Something wasn't right. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Just as he was about to turn the corner, he heard a faint noise. A soft rustling from the far end of the warehouse. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. He motioned to his men to spread out, but he stayed at the front, moving quietly toward the sound. The closer he got, the more he could hear footsteps. They were light, almost too light, as if someone was trying to move without being heard. He turned the corner, his gun ready. And there she was, the woman. She was crouched behind a stack of crates, her eyes wide and frantic. She was trembling, but there was something else in her gaze, fear. And something else. Something that made the Mafia boss stop in his tracks. He wasn't the only one who had been hunting her. The woman looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes filled with disbelief. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Why?" "After everything." He stepped forward, his gun lowering, but his guard never faltering. "You're the key," he said. "Victor's not just coming for you. He's coming for everything." Her eyes flickered with a mix of relief and dread. She knew it too. The storm was closing in. And for the first time, the Mafia boss realized just how deep Victor's game truly ran. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue the story. The woman's eyes were still wide, filled with disbelief and something darker, fear. The Mafia boss could see it clearly now. This wasn't just some frightened girl caught in the middle of a deadly game. She was a piece in a much larger puzzle, one that even he hadn't fully grasped. As she looked at him, her expression shifted, the fear in her eyes turning to something more desperate. "Victor," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "Victor is the least of your worries. You don't understand." The Mafia boss didn't move. His gaze locked on hers, cold and hard. He had always been a man of action, of logic, but right now, her words were like a riddle he couldn't solve. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady, though the words hung in the air like a warning. "Victor," she paused, swallowing hard. "Victor's just the face. He's the one everyone knows. But the real enemy, the one pulling the strings, is someone you'd never expect." Her words hit him like a punch in the gut. Who could be worse than Victor? The thought alone made him uneasy, but he refused to show it. His empire had been built on trust, loyalty, and control. He had dealt with every threat that had come his way, and he had always come out on top. But now, with this woman, with her cryptic warnings, things felt different. He stepped closer, leaning down so he was eye level with her. "Who is it?" he demanded, his voice sharp. She shook her head weakly, as if the answer was too dangerous to say aloud. "I can't. It's not safe." Her words were barely a whisper. The Mafia boss's patience was wearing thin. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not leaving until I know who I'm really up against." She looked up at him, her face pale and trembling, but she could see the determination in his eyes. She knew he wasn't going to leave until he got what he wanted. "You think Victor is the mastermind," she began, her voice faltering. "But he's only the distraction. He's the one you're supposed to focus on. The one who's been trying to tear you apart. But it's not him. It's his backers, the ones who have been funding his operations. They've been waiting for the right moment to take you down." The Mafia boss leaned back, processing her words. He had always assumed that Victor was the endgame, the one person who could bring down everything he had built. But now, hearing this woman speak, he realized that Victor was just a pawn in a much larger game, one that he had failed to see until now. "Who are these backers?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. She hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "I don't know all their names," she said, her voice trembling. "But I do know that they have connections far beyond anything you've ever encountered. They've infiltrated everything: business, government, even your own people." The Mafia boss's mind raced as he processed the information. His empire, the empire he had fought so hard to build, was more vulnerable than he had ever realized. His men, the ones he trusted with his life, might be compromised. The thought made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, with nothing beneath him but darkness. "Who's in charge?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of questions swirling in his mind. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "But I do know that they've been watching you for a long time. They know your every move, your every weakness, and they've been planning this for years. Victor was just a tool they used to get to you." The Mafia boss stood up suddenly, his fists clenching at his sides. His mind was in overdrive, trying to piece together the information she had given him. He had always been the one in control, the one who pulled the strings. But now, he realized that he had been blind to the true nature of the game he was playing. It wasn't just about power or money, it was about survival. He turned to the woman, his eyes cold. "We need to get out of here," he said. "I'll protect you, but you need to tell me everything. Every single detail." She nodded weakly, her eyes still wide with fear. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "But you have to promise me one thing." The Mafia boss raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Promise me that you'll trust no one, not even your closest men. They might be compromised." The words stung, but he knew she was right. His world was crumbling, and he was running out of time. He had no choice but to trust her. "I promise," he said, his voice firm. "Now let's go. We're leaving." As he turned to leave, his mind was racing. This was no longer just about Victor. It was about something far darker, something that threatened everything he had built. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep running from it. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue today's story. The Mafia boss and the woman moved quickly through the dark alleyway behind the warehouse. His mind was racing. The cryptic warnings she had given him kept replaying in his head. Victor is just the distraction. Those words echoed in his mind. He had always been the one in control, the one who played the game and made all the rules. But now, with each step, he realized how little he knew. This wasn't just about power or money. It was about survival. And the stakes had never been higher. The woman's trembling figure led the way, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She was scared, that much was obvious, but there was a determination in her movements. She wasn't just running for her life. She was running from a threat that was much larger than either of them. The Mafia boss followed her, every sense alert. The streets ahead were empty, the silence oppressive. His mind was consumed by the thought of who could be behind all this. Victor's backers, she had said. But who were they? And what did they want? His empire was built on trust, on loyalty. But now, the foundation beneath him felt shakier than ever. His thoughts were interrupted as the woman stopped in her tracks. She turned to face him, her face pale but determined. "We're being followed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Mafia boss's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. She nodded toward the darkened corner at the end of the alley. "I can feel it. They're watching us." The Mafia boss didn't waste a second. He motioned for her to stay close as he crept toward the corner. He was used to danger, used to being hunted, but this felt different. The air was thick with tension, and every sense he had screamed that they weren't alone. He rounded the corner swiftly, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Nothing. The alleyway was still, too still. His fingers tightened around the grip of his gun, ready for anything. He stepped further into the alley, his steps measured. And then, he heard it, the softest sound, a faint rustle from the far end of the street. Without warning, he spun around, aiming his gun in the direction of the sound. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall and cloaked in darkness. It was one of his men. The Mafia boss lowered his gun, a mixture of relief and frustration flooding his chest. "Luca," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of irritation. "What the hell are you doing here?" Luca's face was grim, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something darker. "We got a report, boss. You're not the only one looking for her." The Mafia boss's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Luca stepped closer, his voice low. "There's been movement in your inner circle. Some of your men, they're being paid off. Someone's trying to take you down from the inside." The word struck like a thunderclap. The Mafia boss had always believed in loyalty, in controlling his empire with an iron fist. But now, as the weight of Luca's words settled in, he realized how deeply the rot had set in. His own people, the ones he trusted, were being turned against him. "Who?" the Mafia boss asked, his voice icy. "Who's behind this?" Luca hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "We don't know yet, but they're watching you." "And the woman?" He trailed off, his eyes flicking to the woman standing behind the Mafia boss. The woman's eyes were wide, and she seemed to know exactly what Luca was talking about. She stepped forward. "They've been watching me for a long time," she said softly. "I thought I could escape, but they always find me. They know everything." The Mafia boss looked at her, his thoughts spinning. This wasn't just about Victor anymore. There were deeper forces at play, forces that had infiltrated his own ranks. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. "I need to know who's behind this," the Mafia boss said, his tone unyielding. "I need to know who's pulling the strings." Luca nodded. "We're working on it. But it's bigger than you think, boss. Whoever this is, they've been planning this for years. They know everything about you, about your business, about your every move." The Mafia boss clenched his jaw. He had always been one step ahead, always in control. But now, the game had changed. He was no longer just fighting Victor. He was fighting an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict. The woman stepped closer to him, her voice almost a whisper. "You can't trust anyone, not even your closest men," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and understanding. "Not now? Not with them watching." The Mafia boss's stomach twisted with unease. He had built his empire on trust, on loyalty. But now, that foundation was crumbling. He didn't know who to trust anymore. But he knew one thing for sure. If he didn't find out who was behind this soon, he would lose everything. His power, his empire, and maybe even his life. "We're leaving," he said, his voice hard as steel. "We're going to find out who's behind this. And we're going to take them down." He turned toward the woman, his gaze unwavering. "You're going to help me, whether you like it or not." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. The storm was closing in, and the Mafia boss knew he had to act fast. The game had changed, but he wasn't about to lose it all without a fight. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue today's story. The Mafia boss stood in the dim light of the alleyway, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The woman's words, "You can't trust anyone, not even your closest men," kept echoing in his mind. His empire, his world, everything he had worked for, was crumbling around him. He had spent years building a fortress of loyalty, but now, the foundation felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He turned to Luca, who was standing beside him, his face grim. We need to move fast, the Mafia boss said, his voice low. If what she's saying is true, we're running out of time. Luca nodded. Where do we go next? The Mafia boss thought for a moment. We need to find out who's behind this. Get in touch with everyone we can, every ally, every informant we've ever used. There's someone pulling the strings, and it's not Victor. It's bigger than that. He paused, looking toward the dark road ahead. We need to take the fight to them. I don't care who they are. We'll take them down before they can destroy everything. Luca hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering toward the woman. And her, he asked. The Mafia boss looked back at the woman. She had been quiet since their conversation, her eyes still haunted by fear, but also something else, something he couldn't quite place. She's part of it now, he said flatly. Whether she likes it or not. She knows too much. And she's the only lead we've got. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, her face pale in the dim light. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. The Mafia boss didn't look at her again as he turned and motioned for Luca to follow. Let's go. The drive to their next destination was silent, the weight of the situation pressing in on all of them. The Mafia boss could feel the tension in the air. The closer they got to finding the answers, the more danger loomed over them. Whoever was behind this, whoever was pulling Victor's strings, had been hiding in the shadows for too long. The Mafia boss wasn't going to let them stay there any longer. When they arrived at a safe house on the outskirts of the city, the Mafia boss wasted no time. He stormed inside, his men already waiting for him, ready to act on whatever he needed. Find out everything you can about her, the Mafia boss said, nodding toward the woman. I need everything. Names, connections, history. If she's telling the truth, we don't have much time before they come for us. The woman shifted uncomfortably as the men went to work. She wasn't used to being treated like this, but the Mafia boss knew it had to be done. The silence stretched between them. You're safe here for now, he said, his voice softer. But I need to know everything you can tell me. The more you tell me, the faster we can get to the people who are doing this. She stared at him for a long moment before slowly nodding. I told you, they've been watching me for years. I thought I was just being paranoid. But after tonight, I know they've been following me. They want something from me. I don't know what, but I know they'll stop at nothing to get it. The Mafia boss ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. What is it that they want? She shook her head, her voice shaking. I don't know. All I know is that they've been setting the pieces in motion for years. I'm just a part of it, a pawn in their game. She paused, her eyes filled with fear. But they won't stop. And now that they know I'm here, they'll come for me. They'll come for both of us. The Mafia boss stared at her, trying to understand what she was saying. He had been involved in dangerous games before, but this was something else. He had no idea who was behind it, but it didn't matter. He would find out, and he would stop them before they could destroy him. He turned to Luca, who had been standing nearby, watching the conversation unfold. Give me all the intel we can on this woman, the Mafia boss said. I want everything. Every connection, every move. If she's involved in something, we need to know what it is. Luca nodded, turning to head out. And what about Victor? He asked. The Mafia boss looked at him with cold eyes. Victor is just a distraction, he said. We're going after the real people behind all this. As Luca left to carry out his orders, the Mafia boss turned back to the woman. You said you don't know what they want, but you've been involved with them for years. What makes you so sure they'll come after you now? She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. Because I've seen things. I know things. Things that they don't want anyone to know. The Mafia boss stood up, his mind racing. Tell me what you know. Now. She looked at him, her face pale, eyes wide. I can't. I'm not sure who I can trust anymore. But I know one thing. They won't stop until they get what they want. And when they do, they'll have everything. Power, control. Everything I've spent my life running from. The Mafia boss felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. Whoever these people were, they weren't playing by the rules. But neither was he. And if they were coming for him, he would be ready. He had always been one step ahead of his enemies. And this time, he wasn't going to let anyone take what was his. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, Let's continue today's story. The Mafia boss's mind was racing as the woman's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. They won't stop until they get what they want. The weight of her statement pressed down on him. But there was something else, something darker, that gnawed at him. He could feel the walls closing in. His empire had been built on fear, loyalty, and control, but now, that foundation was shaking. He had always prided himself on being several steps ahead of his enemies, but now, it felt like someone was always one step ahead of him. The game had changed. As he sat in the dimly lit safe house, his thoughts flickered between the woman, his men, and the looming threat that seemed to be closing in from every direction. The backers, the ones pulling the strings behind Victor, remained elusive. But one thing was certain, they were watching him. The woman, despite her fear, had proven to be more than just a pawn in this game. She had been running, hiding, but now it was clear that her involvement was no accident. She had a part to play, whether she wanted it or not. She was tangled in the web of power that was suffocating him. The door to the room opened quietly, and Luca stepped inside, his face grim. The Mafia boss looked up. "What do you have?" he asked, his voice flat. Luca's face was set in stone. "We've been digging, boss." The woman. He paused, glancing at her. "She's not lying. We traced her movements. She's been monitored for years. Someone has had eyes on her since the beginning." The Mafia boss leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who?" Luca hesitated, his gaze flicking to the woman again before answering. "We don't have a name yet, but it's big. We've found traces of money flowing through several accounts, all leading back to a shadow group. A group with connections to some of the most powerful figures in the world. Business, politics, even law enforcement." The Mafia boss's grip on his drink tightened. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit, but the picture was still unclear. He had known his enemies, had always known where the power lay, but this was different. He was up against forces that were untouchable, unseen. "And Victor?" he asked, his voice tight. "Is he just a tool?" Lucas shook his head. "Victor is more than just a tool. He's a part of the plan, but he's not the mastermind. Whoever is behind this has been using him to provoke you, to destabilize your empire. They know what you'll do next. They're counting on it." The Mafia boss stood up, his mind churning. "So, what's the next move?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled, though inside, he felt the storm brewing. "We go after the money," Luca replied. "Follow the trail. But we have to be careful. Whoever's behind this has resources, connections. They're not going to let us get close without a fight." The Mafia boss's gaze turned to the woman. She had been quiet throughout the conversation, her eyes reflecting the uncertainty and fear that had taken root in the room. He could see that she wasn't just a victim. She was part of this, and her knowledge was the key to understanding how deep the conspiracy ran. He approached her slowly. "You said they would come after us. What exactly did you mean by that?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something darker. "They won't stop," she repeated. "I've seen it. They control everything. And once they know you're onto them, they'll make their move." The Mafia boss clenched his fists, his patience thinning. "I don't have time for games," he said, his voice a low growl. "Tell me what you know." "Everything." The woman's gaze faltered, but then she spoke, her voice trembling. "The money isn't just for buying power. It's about control. They're planning something bigger, something that will give them control over everything. Over the city, the government, even the people you rely on." The Mafia boss's blood ran cold. "What are they planning?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head, her hands trembling. "I don't know all the details, but I know they've been laying the groundwork for years. They're pulling strings everywhere. People you trust, people you've worked with. And when the time comes, they'll strike. They'll bring everything down." The Mafia boss stood still for a moment, absorbing her words. The pieces were starting to fit, but the picture was more disturbing than he had imagined. He had always controlled the game, but now, for the first time, it felt like he was a player in someone else's strategy, someone who had been planning this for years. "We need to find them," the Mafia boss said, his voice cold, his resolve hardening. "Whoever they are, whatever they're planning, it ends now." He turned to Luca. "Get our best men. I don't care what it takes. We're going after them. We find who's behind this, and we take them down. No one messes with my empire." Luca nodded, his face set with determination. "We'll find them, boss. And we'll make them pay." The Mafia boss turned back to the woman, his eyes hard. "Get ready. We're going to war. She nodded, her face pale, but there was something else, something in her eyes that told him she was ready for whatever was to come. The storm was coming, and the Mafia boss knew that this time, the battle would be unlike anything he had faced before. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue today's story. The Mafia boss stood in the dimly lit room, the cold weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had always controlled every situation, manipulated every variable, but now, for the first time in years, he was blindsided. The woman, who had once been a helpless pawn in his eyes, was turning out to be far more complicated and dangerous than he could have imagined. She had warned him, her words still echoing in his mind. They're coming for us, she had said. They won't stop until they get what they want. His empire, built from the ground up, was being attacked from all sides. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had been too focused on the obvious threats. Victor, the ones in the shadows, while the real danger had always been much closer. He turned to Luca, who was still standing by the door, his face pale. The tension in the room was thick, and it felt like time itself had slowed. Do you have the intel on her yet? The Mafia boss asked, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Luca nodded slowly. It's coming in, boss. But there's something strange. The accounts we traced, they're not just linked to any ordinary players. These are people who've been in the game for decades, but we've never seen their faces. We know their names, but they're ghosts. Real ghosts. The Mafia boss narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just a fight for control of the streets anymore. This was about taking down an empire that operated in the shadows, with no trace, no visible face. The woman, the key, was the only lead they had. He turned back to her. You said they've been watching you for years. Why you? She didn't meet his gaze, her eyes staring down at the floor. Because I know something. Something they can't afford for anyone to know. I didn't even realize what it meant at first. But now it's too late. They've already made their move. The Mafia boss felt his jaw tighten. What is it? What do you know? She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers trembling as she twisted her hands in her lap. It's the plans, she said quietly. Plans for a new world order. They want to control everything. The businesses, the politics, the entire city. And they've already infiltrated every part of your organization. The Mafia boss's heart sank. He had always believed his empire was impenetrable, that no one could touch it. But hearing these words, he knew that his world was far more fragile than he had ever imagined. Who are these people? He demanded. Who is pulling the strings? She looked up at him then, her face pale but resolute. I don't know their names, but I know they are in positions of power, the kind of power that can make or break governments. They have people everywhere, your men, the city officials, the businesses you trust. And they've been planning this for years. The Mafia boss's mind raced. He couldn't fathom how deep this went. It was one thing to fight for control of the streets, to wipe out competitors, but this was a different game. One he had never prepared for. The woman stood up slowly, her face drawn with fatigue. They've been using me as leverage, she continued, her voice low. At first, I thought I was just a victim, a pawn, but I'm not. I'm part of their plan. They knew you'd come for me. They knew you'd want to protect me. Her eyes locked onto his. But you have to understand, there's no protecting me from this. No one can protect themselves from this. The Mafia boss felt a chill run through him. He had always been the protector, the one who made sure everyone, and everything, was under control. But now, the lines were blurred. The enemy wasn't a rival boss or a group of street thugs. It was a force that was infiltrating every part of his life, every part of his empire. I'm not leaving you, he said, his voice firm. We'll find a way to take them down. We will. But even as he said the words, doubt lingered in his mind. Could they really take down an organization that was so deeply embedded in everything they did? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing on the table. He picked it up quickly, his eyes scanning the screen. It was Luca again. Boss, we've got a problem. We've been compromised. Someone tipped off the enemy. They know we're coming for them. The Mafia boss's blood ran cold. What do you mean they know? We don't know how, but they've moved their assets. Everything is shifting. If we don't act now, they'll be gone before we even get close. The Mafia boss stood up quickly, his mind racing. There was no more time to waste. Get the men together. We're going after them. No more waiting. This ends now. He turned to the woman, his eyes intense. Get ready. If they want a war, they're going to get it. Her face was set with a new determination. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed less like a frightened victim and more like a partner in this deadly game. Together, they would go after the people who had been hiding in the shadows, the ones who were playing this game behind closed doors. And no one, not even the ghosts of this shadow empire, would stand in their way. Hello everyone. Before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the final chapter of today's story. The Mafia boss stood in the center of the safe house, the weight of the world pressing down on him. His men had assembled in silence, the tension in the room palpable. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside, everything was on the verge of unraveling. The plan was set. They had tracked the money, the secret deals, the hidden alliances. Now it was time to move. No more games. The enemy had been in the shadows for far too long. The Mafia boss turned to Luca, who was standing at the back, his face as serious as ever. Are we ready? He asked, his voice cold and direct. Luca nodded, his jaw set. Everything's in place, boss. The men are ready. The intel's solid. We move in 1 hour. The Mafia boss glanced at the woman, who stood near the window, staring out into the darkness. She hadn't said much since their conversation earlier, but he could see the resolve in her eyes. She was no longer just a frightened pawn. She was a partner, whether she liked it or not. She was in this as deep as he was. He approached her, his steps slow and deliberate. You're ready? He asked. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I have to be, she replied, her voice steady. The Mafia boss didn't respond. He knew that she was just as much at risk as he was now. But that was the nature of the game. There were no guarantees. Stay close to me, he said finally. We're going to take them down, no matter who they are. She looked at him, her eyes intense. I'm with you. The clock ticked down. The tension in the room grew thicker as the minutes passed. The Mafia boss could feel the storm closing in around them. He had never faced an enemy like this, one that moved in the shadows, one that had infiltrated every level of his empire. But now, there was no turning back. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. We move out in 5 minutes, he said, turning to his men. Stick to the plan. No mistakes. As they prepared to leave, the Mafia boss couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the overwhelming odds against them or the uncertainty of what lay ahead. It was the fact that the enemy they were fighting wasn't just Victor or the shadowy figures behind him. It was something deeper, something more personal. The woman. She had been at the center of it all, and despite everything, he knew she still held some piece of the puzzle. He couldn't afford to ignore it. They made their way to the cars, moving quickly and quietly through the night. The Mafia boss sat in the back of his black SUV, his mind racing. The safe house was just a few miles from the location they had pinpointed. Their target was just ahead. The information they had gathered pointed to a seemingly inconspicuous warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place no one would think to look, hidden in plain sight. But to the Mafia boss, it was the perfect location for a final showdown. As the convoy of cars pulled up to the warehouse, the Mafia boss signaled for his men to spread out. They moved like shadows, slipping into the darkness. The moment of truth had arrived. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. The warehouse was dark, save for the faint glow of a few dim lights overhead. They moved cautiously, the silence broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps. The Mafia boss's hand tightened around his gun. Every instinct told him they weren't alone. And as they reached the center of the warehouse, he saw them. A group of figures, standing in the shadows, their faces obscured. At the front of the group was a man, tall and imposing. Victor. The moment their eyes met, the tension was palpable. So, you found me, Victor said, his voice cold and almost mocking. I was wondering how long it would take. The Mafia boss's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The confrontation he had been preparing for. But as he stepped forward, his mind flashed to the woman standing behind him. She was right. This wasn't just about Victor. This was something much bigger. You don't know what you're up against, Victor continued, his eyes narrowing. You think you can take us down? You're too late. We've already won. The Mafia boss's grip on his gun tightened. We'll see about that, he said, his voice low and filled with deadly intent. The woman moved closer to him, her presence a reminder of everything at stake. This wasn't just a battle for power, it was a fight for survival. With a single motion, the Mafia boss gave the signal. The battle erupted, gunfire echoing through the warehouse. Men moved in, taking cover and firing at will. The Mafia boss didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, cutting through the chaos with precision. His men were everywhere, their training kicking in as they fought to take control of the situation. And then, in the middle of the chaos, he saw it. The truth. The men he had trusted, the people he had built his empire with, were falling. It wasn't just Victor's men, they were being betrayed from within. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. But it wasn't over yet. As the smoke cleared and the last of the gunfire faded, the Mafia boss stood over the fallen figures of his enemies. But his victory was hollow. The enemy he had fought wasn't just a man. It was a system, a network that went deeper than he had ever imagined. And as the woman stood beside him, he realized that this was only the beginning. The war was far from over. They had taken down one enemy, but there were more to come. And this time, there would be no more running. He had learned the hard way that in this game, there could be no compromise, no room for weakness. They would fight until the very end, and he would win, no matter the cost. In this gripping tale of suspense and danger, a Mafia boss finds himself entangled in a world of deception, betrayal, and a dark romance that could cost him everything. As he navigates the treacherous underworld, a woman he once saw as a pawn becomes the key to a much larger conspiracy. Together, they must confront powerful forces lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings of an empire built on fear and loyalty. With each twist, the Mafia boss is forced to face not only his greatest enemy, but the shocking truth about who is truly in control. The dark romance between them grows stronger as they uncover the web of lies and secrets threatening to tear their lives apart. But as they fight to survive, the lines between loyalty and betrayal blur, and they realize that in this world of shadows, no one can be trusted. Will they outsmart their enemies? Or will the darkness consume them both? This story is packed with passion, intrigue, and a dangerous romance that pushes the boundaries of power, control, and trust. Immerse yourself in a world where the stakes are high, and love is as dark as the secrets they keep.